Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with an early preview of Saturday's Grade 1 Champagne Stakes taking place at Belmont at the Big A, with the winner getting an automatic invite to that Breeders Cup Juvenile. So, listen, before we get into this early preview, want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. By subscribing, YouTube will notify you every time we post a new video, which is going to be very helpful because we got a lot of great content coming up for you this week. We have some Breeders' Cup videos coming. We have a lot of Canelan-based videos. I'm going to be joined by Acacia Clement later this week to talk about the Frisette and the Champagne in a little bit more detail. So want to make sure to press that subscribe button. Everything here is free, and everything on the website and the app is free as well. We believe in connecting horse players to all of the best information possible. So your one-stop shop for everything horse racing and handicapping right here on NYRA Bets. Now, let's talk about Saturday's Champagne Stakes. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about the past winners and runners in this race. Last year, of course, won by Timberlake, who we saw go on to win a Derby prep race down at Oaklawn. But the real horse coming out of that race was, of course, Fierceness, who went on to win the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, become champion 2-year-old, and has now asserted himself winning the Florida Derby as a 3-year-old, the Travers as a 3-year-old, as well as the Jim Dandy. 2 Grade 1s and a Grade 2. Not a bad resume. Before that, we've seen horses like Jack Christopher, Jackie's Warrior, Tis the Law, Firenze Fire, Complexity, Practical Joke, even going back to Union Rags in 2011. This race produces outstanding horses. So this is one you absolutely want to be paying attention to, whether you think they might become sprinters later on, like a Practical Joke, like a Jack Christopher, or whether you think they can become some pretty serious racehorses going the 2 turns, like Fierceness. So going to be a great race on Saturday. And let's look at this early card and look at the race here. And this is a mile, of course, for 2-year-olds on the dirt. Now, last year, if you remember, it was a sloppy sealed track. I know we're 6 days out. I might be tempting the weather gods, but the weather on Saturday looks pretty good. It might be a little overcast, but there's really no rain in the forecast for the New York metro area between now and then. So I'm anticipating a dry, fast track, good conditions on Saturday. So that would be outstanding for this 10-horse field. You got JJ Zozo on the inside coming up from Monmouth Park. You got Tip Top Thomas coming off of a maiden win last time out. That was very impressive. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. You got Lethal Speed coming up from Gulfstream Park. Mo Plex coming out of a state-bred victory in the funny side, but also has a Grade 3 victory in the Sanford Stakes 2-back at Saratoga. Uncaged, an interesting horse for Todd Pletcher, one that we might circle back to. I'm not 100% sure this horse is running in this race. I say that because I think there's a chance that horse could be cross-entered in the Breeders' Futurity, and it would be interesting to see where he ends up going. If he ends up staying here and running against a horse like Tip Top Thomas, who is his stablemate, or whether or not he decides to stay up, whether or not he goes back down to Kentucky to run down there. I think part of the thought process is it's interesting to see that Irad Ortiz Jr., who rode both Tip Top Thomas and Uncaged, is on Tip Top Thomas. And that might just be Irad having a choice and going, something, I'm going to go with, I think Tip Top Thomas maybe is a better horse at this stage, and I'm going to go there. Or it might speak to the fact that Uncaged may be going down to Kentucky, and the only option for Irad in this race really was Tip Top Thomas. So something to keep in mind when the Breeders' Futurity card gets drawn on Tuesday. That's going to be something to pay attention to. Then you also have Vekoma Rides, who's really coming off a very impressive win last time out for John Kimmel, and that was just 2 weeks ago at Belmont at the Big A with Kendrick Carmouche aboard. You got Smokin' Wicked for Dallas Stewart. That horse has been working out down in Churchill Downs, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not maybe that one's cross-entered as well in the Breeders' Futurity, but certainly coming off, I thought, a respectable win, a respectable placement, I should say, when going forth in the hopeful. Then you got Butch Reed bringing Colonel Bob up from Parks, winner in debut. Executive Order, a horse we're going to talk a little bit more about for Phil Serpy with Jose Lezcano aboard. That one looked very impressive in debut up at Saratoga. And then, of course, the headliner in this field is Chancer McPatrick, who is the winner so impressively in debut and then came back and followed it up with a thrilling victory in the Grade 1 hopeful at Saratoga for Chad Brown, sired by McKinsey. This one feels like a really special horse, and I think it's interesting that he's chosen to run here. Why do I say that? Chancer McPatrick is a horse that likes to come from off the pace. And in my opinion, you're going to have more success doing that in a one-turn mile setup than you are potentially in a two-turn race. And the way that the race goes, a lot of times you can get a little bit more pace and a little bit more speed in a one-turn race as opposed to a two-turn race. Chancer, I think, is a horse that absolutely, from a pedigree standpoint, should be able to stretch out. So I'm not worried about getting a mile and a 16th for the Breeders' Cup or anything like that. But I think just from a race shape standpoint, he benefits from a one-turn mile in some ways. And it's interesting. Obviously, Chad Brown trainee. We saw another Chad Brown horse this year, Sierra Leone, also like to come from well off the pace. And it's interesting because Sierra Leone never really had a chance to be a one-turn horse. He developed a little bit later, didn't run until the Aqueduct meet in the winter, and then ran in the Remsen. And so you didn't really get a chance to see him go one turn the way that you've seen Chancer McPatrick do it. I wonder if Sierra Leone would have been so dominant as a one-turn horse potentially if he had been a little bit more precocious, maybe a little bit more ready earlier as a two-year-old, the way that Chancer is. It's just something to keep in mind. But like I said, I'm not worried about the horse stretching out to two turns from a pedigree standpoint, but I think from a race shape standpoint, I do think it's nice to have him run one more one-turn race to some extent. So I think it just sets up a little bit nicer. You're going to get a little bit more pace up front, I think, in those types of races. And I think it just is going to play out a little bit better for him. But listen, this is a really nice field of 10. Like I said, we'll have to see who ends up cross-entering here. But let's talk about some of these horses in a little bit more detail. And let's start with Chancer McPatrick. This is a horse that likes to come from off the pace. Won in Saratoga in debut. I was there that day. I was on the rail that day for that maiden victory. There was no chance I thought he was going to get there turning for home and even halfway down the stretch. This horse has another gear and is able to just pick off horses down the stretch, and it's impressive. But one of the things that I think is fascinating is looking at his starts the last couple of times out. So let's take a look at his start in the maiden special weight debut at Saratoga. Now, this is the head-on shot. So this is coming down the backstretch, but this is just a head-on shot. He's the number 4 horse, so keep your eye on that. He actually breaks quite well this day in terms of breaking cleanly from the gate, no interference with other horses. But let's just take a look at that. And so you see him coming out of that 4 post, no real issues, breaks pretty well. Maybe doesn't have the elite speed that you would hope to see from some of these other precocious 2-year-olds, but now he's in behind horses. Now look right here. He's throwing his head up. He doesn't like the kickback. He doesn't like his placement at all. And he really never gets comfortable on the back stretch. You can still see him weaving around a little bit and he's trying to find his best stride. It's interesting to see that from that horse. That was an educational experience. And even Chad Brown said he's got to break a little bit better. He's got to show a little bit better speed. Well, he didn't. And part of it was, in the hopeful, he certainly didn't do that. Part of it was not his fault necessarily. So in the hopeful, he's the number 8 horse in this race. Now here he breaks in, and there's a lot of bumping that goes around in the early stages of this race. And you can see here he's on the outside of the 8, and then boom, he goes in, he comes back out, and next thing you know, he's just behind pretty early. And he also lost an iron at some point in this race as well. And so this was one again where next thing you know, he's at the back of the pack. Now, he's handling the kickback a little bit better that time, but he's also further outside. He's not in between horses. I actually think the outside post position here, post 10, suits him perfectly. He can break, doesn't have to break on top. Obviously, can break a little bit slow and just kind of gradually work his way over to save a little bit of ground going into the far turn. But I actually like the outside post quite a bit here. Now, in case you don't remember, let's watch this hopeful stretch run, and we'll pick it up around the turn. And again, he's the number 8 horse. You'll see him coming, sitting basically second to last at this point, turning for home. He kicks 6 wide, and just an incredible burst here. I mean, the horse is covered in dirt. You don't see 2-year-olds take this sort of thing very well. Ferocious is lugging out at this point. Now Ferocious and Chancer kind of pick each other up in some ways. Smoking Wicked, by the way, is the one in the lead at this point and just starts getting tracked down late. But suddenly, look at Chancer go. I mean, this is a horse that just keeps getting stronger. That stride keeps getting longer. Ferocious is running so well, and Chancer ends up getting the win there. Such an impressive effort. And he's going to get a fair amount of pace in this race because it's a 2-year-old race. And you look at a horse like Executive Order, Colonel Bob, Smokin' Wicked. You can look at a horse like Moplex. You can look at a horse like Tip Top Thomas. You can look at a horse like JJ Zozo, who's on the inside rail. All of those horses are going to flash significant speed. So Chancer should absolutely get the pace set up in terms of that one-turn mile. He seems to get stronger with every single stride late in the race. He certainly looks formidable in this spot. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about Moplex. This is an interesting horse for Jeremiah Englehart in that he's a horse that won the Sanford, has an open company grade 3 victory, okay? State-bred, New York-bred horse, won a state-bred in debut, then stepped up, won that Sanford, and then went back to run in the funny side rather than running in the hopeful, which I thought was interesting. And had a little bit of a tough time in that hopeful. Ran, barely was able to nose out Soon to Be King. Had a little bit of trouble at the start that day going 6 furlongs. I'm not 100% sure this horse is going to want a mile. He feels more like a sprinter to me, but he absolutely deserves an opportunity to take a shot here. Had Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard the first 3 times out, Irad not riding him, Manny Franco picking up the ride here, sired by Complexity, who's been a very nice first crop sire. We should mention Mackenzie, also a first crop sire. So interesting to see some of these first crop sires. Obviously, Vekoma Ride, sired by Vekoma, another first crop sire. So you've seen a lot of these first crop sires coming out with some impressive performances. And I think that Moplex is one that if you look at the numbers, he's just not fast enough to really get to this group. And I just don't know. I mean, 3 for 3, has never lost. Graded stakes victory, 2 stakes wins overall, almost $250,000 already earned. So a very profitable horse that was only $45,000 at the OBS April sales this past year. So Jeremiah has done a great job with this horse and placing him. He's working out nicely leading up to this race. Again, I do wonder if distance might be a little bit of an issue for him. Now, one horse that I want to talk a little bit more about is Tip Top Thomas. And this is a horse that Irad Ortiz Jr. is opting to ride for trainer Todd Pletcher, sired by Volatile, and was, I thought, incredibly impressive in debut. And this picks up going around the far turn. He's in the stalking position on the outside. He's got the red, white, and blue silks on and turns for home. Rookie Card had set some very aggressive early fractions, 21-4 to the quarter, 45-1 to the half. And you see a horse like Key Waden really coming down the stretch there on the far outside, the number 6, another Chad Brown runner, actually. But what I love about Tip Top Thomas is he is digging in and he is fending off Rookie Card. Key Waden almost gets up there. Now, we've not seen Key Waden run back since. I would have loved to have seen that horse run back since that race just to kind of get a sense how good he might be at a little bit of a longer distance, because I think he might have a lot of talent. The interesting thing is Rookie Card, who finished second that day, did come back and finish second again at a very short price. So I do wonder, maybe Rookie Card's a little bit of a hanger in some ways. He fights. He was pretty. Once he got headed, he didn't give in. But I do wonder about just his running style. Maybe he needs a little bit of a boost to get over the top in terms of getting that win. The good part, though, from a standpoint of speed figures, is Rookie Card came back to run almost the exact same number in his second start. So not a lot of regression in that regard, which bodes well for Tip Top Thomas, who, again, has very good early speed, broke from an inside position that day, was the number 3 horse, so is familiar with having to break from the inside, probably has better early speed than JJ Zozo, so presumably could get over to the rail and kind of hold that inside rail position going down the stretch. Irad's going to be pretty aggressive with this horse. I would imagine they're going to have this horse either on the lead or sitting no worse than second or third in the early going of this race. And I think the inside post kind of maybe pushes the issue a little bit to get out there up front and to be on the lead. But this is one certainly that I think is very impressive that you have to take seriously in this spot. And then the other one I really want to highlight is Executive Order. This is a horse for, like I said, for Phil Serpy, who I was really impressed by in that restricted maiden special weight victory. Now, it was a restricted race to those that sold for $50,000 or less. This was an $18,000 purchase sired by Unified. And I mean, looked so good in debut. Didn't get a ton of action in debut. Went off at 5-1 that day, actually. But this is a horse, again, we're going to pick it up on the far turn, and he's in that stalking position outside of Friday Surprise and another horse, Printer's Alley, who was the heavy favorite that day. He really made no impact. And you see Friday Surprise kind of floating out into the middle of the track, executive order going wide as a result. And then jockey Jose Lezcano kind of shakes the reins. This horse gets to the front, and then Jose goes to the crop once, and you see all of a sudden this horse really take off, and suddenly he's up 3-4 lengths, and Jose goes to the crop one more time. I think just basically to keep him on task, and he ends up winning by over 7 lengths in that debut. I thought was a very, very impressive runner that day. You might be able to get a little bit of a price on him, and his speed figure came back very strong, 78. Very much so in line with where some of the other major contenders are. But obviously, like I said, Chancer is your obvious favorite in this race. Flavien Prat stays aboard for the third straight race for trainer Chad Brown. It'll be interesting to see, again, where the Breeders' Futurity ends up going. Uncaged, that's an interesting horse. Like I said, not 100% sure he's going to be running in this race. Could be down at the Breeders' Futurity. If he is here, he's a serious threat, because he's a horse that has shown the ability to rate from off the pace, won over a muddy sealed track. Now, I do always have a little bit of concern about maiden winners, debut winners that win over a muddy sealed track and whether or not they can replicate that over a dry fast track. But listen, this is son of Curlin. There's plenty of pedigree here. Dams by Pioneer of the Nile. Should be able to run for days. I'm not worried about that. Joel Rosario listed up on the mount right now. We'll just have to wait and see. But in my opinion, this race really starts and stops with Chancer. This is his opportunity to really put a stamp on this 2-year-old division right now and really assert himself as the favorite going into the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So great opportunity for him going a mile, plenty of pace in front of him in this race. I also got to give a shout out to JJ Zozo, because he's sired by my boy Sea Wizard, who is an obscenely good New Jersey bred sire. You go, Matthew, how good can this New Jersey bred sire be? Well, I'll tell you, he's winning 30% of his first out starters. Overall, 17% of his horses have won. His offspring have won. 20% dirt sprints. He is probably a little bit more distance limited, but his 2-year-olds have been fantastically precocious. 26% winners from his 2-year-olds. So, for a New Jersey bred, Sea Wizard, just top of the class. I always got to give Sea Wizard some love. The other horse I'll mention is Smokin' Wicked. I mentioned he's working it out at Churchill Downs. I'm not sure if Dallas ships up here or if he keeps him in Kentucky and runs him in the Breeders' Futurity. But that's a horse that obviously showed a lot more speed last time out in the hopeful. Faded to 4th. But listen, I don't think there's any you don't lose any respect finishing second at Chancer McPatrick and behind, I should say, Chancer McPatrick and Ferocious. I think that's a horse that, if he's entered in this spot, certainly could be pretty dangerous, has a lot of class, really doesn't run bad races overall. I've been impressed by him each time. Dallas Stewart always manages to get a big price up in the try, up in the exacta. His runners always kind of outrun their odds, in my opinion. I always like Dallas as a trainer quite a bit. So Smokin' Wicked, another one to keep in mind, maybe for your deeper exotics. But this is going to be a fun race. We're going to talk about this race and the Frisette with Acacia Clement later this week. Like I said, we're going to have a lot of great early previews of the Breeders' Futurity. Well, I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Kaylee Shapiro. For that, we're going to have some preview of the Arc taking place over in France this weekend. We're going to have some Breeders' Cup coverage as well. We got track stats for Santa Anita and Belmont at the Big A. Listen, you need to like this video and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube if you haven't already. If you're a horse racing fan, we got you covered with wall-to-wall action every single day. All right, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races and reminding you it's now post time.